I know you don't remember me, but your dreams do. That was the first thing he ever said to me. And somehow it felt less like a sentence and more like something unlocking inside my chest, like a door I didn't know existed suddenly swinging open in the dark. Because the truth is, I had been dreaming about him long before that moment, long before I knew his name, long before I ever stood 3 feet away from him in a quiet cafe that smelled like burnt espresso and rain-soaked pavement, trying to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. The dreams always started the same way. Soft at first, like stepping into a memory mid-scene, sunlight cutting through tall windows I didn't recognize, laughter that felt like mine but didn't sound like me, and him. Always him, standing just out of reach, close enough that I could see the way his eyes softened when he looked at me, like I mattered in a way that felt too big, too certain, too real to belong to someone I'd never met. I told myself it was stress, or maybe just my brain pulling fragments from movies, books, random faces I passed on the street, stitching them into something that felt meaningful, because humans are wired to find patterns, right? But that explanation started to fall apart the moment the details stopped changing, because dreams aren't supposed to be consistent. They aren't supposed to remember things you forgot. And yet every night it was the same voice, the same hands brushing against mine, the same quiet gravity pulling me closer, like something unfinished was waiting for me on the other side. I tried to forget him. I really did. I deleted the notes I'd started writing about the dreams at 2 a.m. I stopped going to sleep with music, stopped letting my mind wander, even switched coffee shops like that would somehow break whatever invisible thread kept leading me back to him. But nothing worked, because the more I tried to erase him, the clearer he became, like resistance only sharpened the edges. And then came the moment everything broke, the moment reality stopped feeling like something solid and started acting like a mirror cracking down the center, because I walked into that cafe on a random Tuesday afternoon, rain dripping off my jacket, already rehearsing the speech I'd give myself about how this was just another place, just another day. And then I saw him sitting there like he'd been carved out of every dream I'd ever tried to forget. And my body reacted before my brain could catch up, breath stuttering, heartbeat tripping over itself, something deep and instinctive whispering, "You're late. You're late." And when he looked up, when his eyes met mine, there was no confusion, no hesitation, just recognition so immediate it made my chest ache, like he'd been waiting, like I was the missing piece of something he'd never stopped holding on to. And I remember thinking, this isn't real, this isn't possible, because I don't know you. I've never known you. But the way my hands trembled said otherwise. The way my feet carried me closer without permission said otherwise. And then he spoke, calm and certain and devastatingly familiar. "You finally came back." And something inside me cracked wide open, because I didn't come back. I never left, except suddenly, terrifyingly, it felt like I had. The air between us felt too thin, like I had stepped into a version of the world that was missing something essential. And maybe that something was me, because the way he looked at me was not curiosity. It was not surprise. It was certainty, the kind that settles deep in your bones and refuses to move. And I found myself shaking my head before I could even form the words, because if I said them out loud, then it would become real. And I was not ready for that. I was not ready for him, for this, for the way my chest tightened like it was remembering something my mind had locked away. "I think you have the wrong person," I said, but my voice betrayed me, softer than I intended, uncertain in a way that made it sound like I was asking him to correct me, like I wanted him to prove me wrong. And he did not argue. He did not rush. He just watched me with that same steady gaze, like he had all the time in the world, like he had already waited longer than I could understand. And then he stood up slowly, the scrape of the chair against the floor loud in the quiet space, grounding and unreal at the same time. And when he stepped closer, something inside me leaned forward without permission, like gravity had shifted and I was no longer in control of my own center. "Ethan," he said, and hearing my name in his voice felt different, heavier, like it carried history, like it had been said 1,000 times before in places I could not see. And I swallowed hard, because I never told him my name. I was sure of that. I replayed every second since I walked in, every breath, every glance, and there was no moment where I gave it away, which meant either I was missing something obvious or this was something else entirely. something I did not have a language for yet. How do you know that? I asked, and for the first time something shifted in his expression, not doubt, not hesitation, but something softer, almost careful, like he was choosing his next words with precision. Because you told me, he said, and that should not have made sense. It did not make sense, but the way my heart reacted told a different story, a sudden, sharp pull that felt like recognition trying to break through the surface, and images flickered at the edge of my vision, too fast to hold, too fragmented to understand, a hand brushing mine across a table, a quiet laugh, the feeling of standing beside him somewhere open and bright, like sunlight stretching across water, and I blinked hard, forcing the world back into focus, forcing him back into being a stranger, because that was safer, that was something I could control. No, I said, more firmly this time, even as my fingers curled slightly like they were reaching for something that was not there. I did not. And he nodded once, like he expected that answer, like it fit into a pattern he had already memorized. And that scared me more than anything else, because it meant this was not the first time, not for him, and the thought settled cold and heavy in my chest. You do not remember, he said quietly, not as a question, but as a statement, and I hated how gentle it sounded, how it made something in me want to believe him, want to step forward instead of back. There is nothing to remember. I shot back, but even as I said it, the world tilted. Slightly, just enough to make me doubt my own words, because the cafe suddenly felt too familiar, the angle of the light, the sound of the espresso machine, the exact spot where he stood, like I had been here before, like I had stood in this moment and made a different choice. And the realization hit me like a whisper I could not ignore. What if forgetting was not the truth? What if it was the lie I had been telling myself all along? The silence stretched longer than it should have, thick and heavy, like the world itself was waiting for me to catch up to something I could not see yet. And I found myself taking a step back without realizing it. Like distance might help me think, might help me breathe, but it only made the pull sharper, like something invisible snapped tighter the farther I tried to go. And Lucas noticed, of course he did, his eyes tracking every movement like he had done this before, like he knew exactly how far I would run before I stopped. And that thought settled deep in my chest, unsettling and strangely grounding at the same time. You always do that, he said quietly, and I froze because there it was again, that word, always, like this moment was not new, like I was the only one experiencing it for the first time. Do what? I asked, even though part of me already knew the answer, and he tilted his head slightly, studying me like he was trying to find something familiar beneath the surface. You step back when it starts to feel real, he replied, and the way he said real made my pulse spike, because that was exactly what I was trying to avoid, reality, whatever this version of it was, the one where a stranger knew me better than I knew myself, the one where my own thoughts felt borrowed, like echoes of something that had already happened. And I shook my head again, more forcefully this time, because if I let that idea settle, if I let it take root, I was not sure what it would grow into. You are wrong, I said, but the words felt thin, like they did not carry enough weight to hold against whatever this was. And Lucas exhaled slowly, not frustrated, not impatient, just steady, like he had practiced this kind of patience over and over again. Then stay, he said, simple and direct. And that caught me off guard more than anything else, because I expected him to argue, to push, to try and convince me. But he did not. He just gave me a choice, one that felt heavier than it should have. Stay for 5 minutes, he continued, his voice softer now, almost careful. If nothing feels familiar, I will leave you alone. And I should have said no. I should have walked out, because every instinct was telling me that staying meant stepping deeper into something I did not understand, something that could change everything. But my feet did not move, my body did not listen, and before I could stop myself, I nodded, just once, like the decision had already been made somewhere deeper than thought. And the moment I did, something shifted, subtle but undeniable, like the air itself relaxed, like the world had been holding its breath and finally let it go. And Lucas gestured toward the empty chair across from him, the same chair I somehow knew I had sat in before. And that realization sent a quiet shiver down my spine. But I moved anyway, each step feeling both new and strangely rehearsed, like I was following a path I had already walked. And when I sat down, When the distance between us settled into something smaller, something more dangerous, the noise of the cafe faded just enough to make everything else louder. The rhythm of my heartbeat, the quiet scrape of his fingers against the table, the way his gaze never wavered. And for a moment neither of us spoke. And in that silence, something flickered again, not a full memory, not something I could hold, but a feeling, warm and steady, like sitting across from him had once been the easiest thing in the world. And I swallowed hard, because that was the most terrifying part, not the confusion, not the unanswered questions, but the fact that a part of me was starting to believe him. 5 minutes should not feel like a lifetime. But sitting across from him, watching the way his fingers rested loosely against the table like they belonged there, like they had always belonged there, time stretched into something unfamiliar, something slower and heavier, and I became painfully aware of every small detail. The quiet hum of the espresso machine behind the counter, the faint scent of roasted coffee beans and rain clinging to the air, the soft rhythm of my own breathing as it tried and failed to stay steady. And through all of it, his gaze never left me, not intense in a way that demanded, but steady in a way that held, like he was anchoring me to something I could not yet see. And I shifted slightly in my seat. The movement small, but enough to break the stillness. You said 5 minutes. I murmured, more to remind myself than him. Because if this was a test, I needed to hold on to something measurable, something real. And he nodded once, like he understood exactly what I was doing, like he had seen me do it before. Then we will start with something simple, he said, his voice calm, even, and that word start sent a strange ripple through me, because it implied there was more, that this was not the beginning but a continuation, and before I could question it, he leaned forward just slightly, not enough to invade my space, just enough to shift the air between us, and asked, "What do you dream about when you cannot sleep?" And the question caught me off guard, not because it was intrusive, but because it was too precise, too close to something I had been trying to bury, and I hesitated, my fingers curling slightly against the edge of the table, because answering that meant acknowledging it, giving shape to something I had been trying to dissolve. But the silence stretched again, patient, waiting, and I found myself speaking before I could stop it. "A place I do not recognize," I said slowly, each word careful, measured, and someone. And even saying that felt like stepping onto unstable ground, like the truth was something that could collapse beneath me if I leaned too far into it. And Lucas did not interrupt, did not react with surprise or confusion. He just listened, like he already knew what I was about to say, and that made it easier and harder at the same time. He is always there. I continued, my voice quieter now, almost lost beneath the noise of the cafe, and it feels like I should know him, like I do know him. But I wake up and there is nothing. And the last word lingered, hollow and incomplete, because nothing was not entirely true. There was always something left behind, a feeling, a weight, an absence that felt too specific to be empty. And Lucas exhaled softly, the sound barely audible, but enough to pull my attention back to him. And when I looked up, something in his expression had shifted again. Not relief, not exactly, but something close, something that carried both warmth and something deeper, something that looked like it had been waiting for this moment. "It is not nothing," he said gently, and the certainty in his voice made something in my chest tighten, because he was not guessing. He was stating, like he had lived through this answer already, like he had heard it before. "Then what is it?" I asked, the question slipping out sharper than I intended, because I needed something solid, something that made sense, and he held my gaze, steady, unwavering. "It is what you chose to leave behind," he replied, and the words settled between us, quiet but heavy. And for a moment, everything else faded, the sounds, the movement, the world outside this small space, because something inside me reacted to that, not with understanding, but with recognition, like a distant echo finally reaching the surface, and I felt it then, faint but undeniable, a pull not forward, but backward, like something behind me was calling, waiting, unfinished, and I realized with a sudden, quiet certainty that terrified me more than anything else. My 5 minutes had already started long before I sat down, and I was not sure I had ever really left. The words lingered longer than they should have, settling somewhere beneath my ribs like they were looking for a place to stay, and I hated how they fit, how they made a kind of sense that I could not explain, Because leaving something behind implied there had been something to leave, something real, something that mattered enough to walk away from. And I shook my head again, slower this time, less certain, because the denial did not come as easily as it had before. That does not make any sense, I said, but even as the sentence left my mouth, it felt incomplete, like I was arguing with something that was not finished speaking yet. And Lucas did not push. He did not interrupt. He just watched me with that same quiet patience, like he knew this part, like he had stood here before and waited for me to catch up. And that thought pressed in again, heavier now, harder to ignore. Then explain it. I added, the words sharper than I intended. Because if he was going to say things like that, if he was going to look at me like I was something he had already lost once, then I needed more than half answers. I needed something I could hold on to, something that did not feel like it would disappear the moment I tried to understand it. And Lucas leaned back slightly, giving me space without really moving away, like even distance between us followed rules I did not know yet. And for a moment he said nothing, his gaze drifting just enough to the side like he was choosing where to begin. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, not weaker, just more careful. You told me once that forgetting would be easier, he said, and the sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything I thought I knew. Because that was not something you said casually. That was not something you said unless there was a reason, unless there was something you were trying to escape. And my chest tightened, a slow, steady pressure building behind my ribs. I never said that, I replied automatically. But this time the words did not come with the same certainty. They felt like a reflex, like something I was supposed to say rather than something I believed. And Lucas nodded again, that same small, understanding motion that made it feel like he was agreeing with both versions of me at once. Not like this, he said, and his hand shifted slightly on the table, just enough that the movement caught my attention, just enough that my eyes followed it without thinking. And for a split second, something flickered again, sharper this time, clearer, a memory that was not mine, but felt like it belonged somewhere inside me. His hand reaching across the same table, the same space. Fingers brushing against mine like it was the most natural thing in the world, like there had never been a question of distance between us. And I inhaled sharply, the air catching in my throat as the image snapped back into nothing, leaving behind only the echo of the feeling, warm and steady and completely unfamiliar in a way that felt wrong. Because it should not feel unfamiliar, not if it came from me, not if it was something I had lived. And I pulled my hand back instinctively, even though he had not touched me, even though the space between us remained unchanged. What was that? I asked, the question quieter now, edged with something that felt dangerously close to fear. And Lucas's gaze returned to mine immediately, sharper now, more focused, like he had been waiting for that exact reaction. You felt it, he said, not asking, just confirming. And I hesitated, because denying it felt pointless now. Because whatever this was, it was already happening whether I wanted it to or not. It was not real, I said instead. But the words lacked conviction. They drifted more than they landed. And Lucas leaned forward just slightly again, closing the distance by inches that felt like miles. It is more real than anything you are trying to hold on to right now, he replied softly. And something in his voice shifted, something deeper, something that carried weight I could not ignore. You did not forget by accident, he continued, each word deliberate, careful, like he was placing them where they needed to go. You chose to forget me. And the sentence hit harder than anything else he had said, not because I believed it, not yet, but because something inside me reacted like it was hearing the truth for the first time. And I realized with a slow, sinking certainty that terrified me more than anything before, I was not just afraid of what I did not remember. I was afraid of what might happen if I finally did. The words should have pushed me away, should have made me stand up and walk out and never look back. But instead they settled somewhere deep inside me, quiet and heavy, like they belonged there, like they had always been there waiting for me to hear them again. And I found myself staring at him longer than I should have, searching his face for something that would break the illusion, something that would prove this was just coincidence or imagination or anything other than what it felt like. But there was nothing, no crack in his certainty, no hesitation in the way he held my gaze. And that was the problem. Because people hesitate when they are unsure. People falter when they are lying. But Lucas didn't either. He just stayed, steady and patient, and Impossibly sure, like he had already lived through every version of this moment and knew exactly where it would lead. And that thought made my chest tighten again, sharper this time, because it meant I was the only one lost here, the only one trying to catch up to something that had already happened. Why would I do that? I asked finally, my voice quieter now, less defensive and more searching, because if what he was saying was true, if there was even a small chance that it was, then there had to be a reason, something big enough to make me walk away from whatever this was, from him, from something that felt this strong even without memory to support it. And Lucas's expression shifted slightly at that. Not relief, not exactly, but something softer, something that looked like understanding layered over something deeper, something that carried weight I could not yet name. Because you thought it would protect me, he said. And the answer came so easily, so naturally, like it had been said before, like it had been lived, and something in me reacted instantly. A sharp, sudden pull that felt like a thread tightening between us. And for a second the cafe disappeared again, not completely, but enough that something else slipped through, something brighter, warmer, a different version of light spilling across the same table, his voice closer, softer, saying my name in a way that felt like home, and I blinked hard, my breath catching as the image fractured and fell away, leaving me back in the present with my heart racing like I had just run miles without moving an inch. That does not make sense, I repeated, but this time it sounded weaker, like I was trying to convince myself more than him, and Lucas leaned forward just a fraction, not enough to close the distance completely, just enough to make it feel intentional, like every inch between us mattered. You always say that when you are close to remembering, he replied, and there it was again, that word, always, like this was not new, like I was following a script I had written and forgotten, and the idea sent a quiet panic through me, because if that was true, then how many times had this happened? How many times had I sat here, had this conversation, made this choice, and I swallowed hard, the question slipping out before I could stop it. How many times? And for the first time since this started, Lucas paused, not long, not enough to break his composure, but enough that I noticed, enough that something in my chest dropped slightly, because that hesitation meant something. It meant there was an answer I might not be ready for. And when he finally spoke, his voice was still calm, still steady, but there was something else beneath it now, something heavier, something that felt like it carried more than just words. This is the first time you came back this far, he said, and the sentence settled into the space between us like a truth that had been waiting, and I felt it then, not just fear, not just confusion, but something else, something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to recognition. Because if this was the first time, then there had been other times, other attempts, other versions of me who never made it this far. And the realization hit me slowly, steadily, like a tide rising around my feet. I was not just remembering something I lost. I was retracing something I had already tried to escape, and I did not know if this time would end any differently. The words echoed longer than they should have, repeating in my head with a rhythm that felt too familiar, too practiced, like I had heard them before and simply forgotten the sound. And I sat there frozen for a moment, staring at him while everything inside me tried to reorganize itself around this new reality. This idea that I had been here before, that I had almost reached this point before, that there were versions of me who turned away just before the truth could catch them. And the thoughts settled deep, unsettling and strangely grounding at the same time, because it meant this feeling, this pull, this confusion was not random. It was part of something larger, something that had been unfolding long before I became aware of it. And I exhaled slowly, my fingers tightening slightly against the edge of the table as if I needed something physical to hold on to, something that would not shift or disappear the moment I tried to understand it. Then why did I stop? I asked, the question slipping out before I could filter it, quieter now, less defensive. Because if this had happened before, if I had come close and then turned away, there had to be a reason, something strong enough to override whatever this connection was, something that made forgetting feel like the better choice. And Lucas watched me carefully, his expression unreadable for a moment longer than usual, like this answer carried more weight than the others, like it was not just information but something that could change the direction of everything. And for the first time since I sat down, I saw it clearly, the hesitation, small but real, a crack in the certainty he had held so effortlessly until now. And that scared me more than anything else, because if he was unsure, if there was something he could not predict, then whatever came next was not part of the pattern. It was something new, something neither of us had experienced before. And my pulse quickened at the thought, equal parts fear and something else I could not quite name. Because remembering changes you, he said finally, his voice lower, steadier than his expression had been, like he was choosing strength over uncertainty, and the sentence landed quietly but deeply, because it was not dramatic, it was not overwhelming, it was simple and absolute, and that made it more terrifying, because change meant losing something, leaving something behind, becoming someone else entirely, and I swallowed hard, my mind racing through possibilities I could not fully grasp, because if remembering him meant changing, then what did that say about who I was right now, about the life I had built without those memories, about the version of me sitting here pretending that this was just another conversation in another cafe on another ordinary day? Into what? I asked, the words barely above a whisper, because I was not sure I wanted the answer, not if it meant unraveling everything I thought I understood about myself. And Lucas held my gaze, steady again, but softer now, like he understood the fear behind the question, like he had felt it before from me. Into someone who cannot walk away, he replied, and the certainty in his voice returned, not forceful, not demanding, just present, like gravity, like something that existed whether I accepted it or not. And something inside me reacted instantly, a sharp, undeniable pull that felt like recognition pressing against the surface, like a memory just out of reach trying to break through, and I leaned back slightly, instinctively creating space as if distance could slow whatever was happening. But it did not, because the feeling stayed, steady and persistent, threading through my chest like it had always been there, waiting for me to notice it again, and I realized then, with a clarity that made my breath hitch, this was not just about remembering him. It was about remembering who I had been with him, and that might be the thing I was most afraid of losing. The words settled between us like something irreversible, something that could not be taken back once it was said, and I felt it again. That shift beneath the surface, subtle but undeniable, like the ground of who I thought I was had started to loosen, and I sat there trying to hold on to something stable, something familiar, but everything felt just slightly out of alignment, like the world had tilted a few degrees, and I was the only one noticing it. And I exhaled slowly, dragging a hand through my hair in a motion that felt instinctive, automatic, like I had done it 100 times before in moments just like this, and the thought stopped me mid-motion. Because that was the problem. Everything was starting to feel like that, familiar in ways I could not explain, like echoes of actions I had already lived, and I dropped my hand, staring at the table as if it might ground me, as if it might anchor me to something real. But even that felt uncertain now, because real was becoming harder to define. And if I remember, I said slowly, forcing the words out one at a time, I cannot walk away. And repeating it out loud made it feel heavier, more solid, like it was locking into place, and Lucas did not answer right away, which told me enough. Because silence can confirm more than words ever could, and I let out a breath that felt like it had been building for longer than I realized, because this was the edge, this was the point where everything split, where I either stayed here in this version of myself or stepped into something else entirely, something I did not understand yet, and I hated how much of me wanted to know, how much of me was already leaning toward it, like curiosity had roots deeper than fear. Show me, I said suddenly, the words surprising even me, because I had not planned to say them, had not planned to take that step. But once they were out there, they felt right, like they belonged to a version of me that was finally catching up, and Lucas's gaze sharpened instantly, something in his expression shifting into something more focused, more certain, like this was the moment he had been waiting for. And he did not ask if I was sure. He did not hesitate. He just nodded once, slow and deliberate, like he was acknowledging a choice that had already been made. It will not be clear at first, he said. Quietly, his voice steady but softer now, like he understood the weight of what he was about to do. It never is. And that word again. Never. Like this was a process, a pattern, something repeated and refined over time. And before I could question it, before I could second-guess myself, he moved, just slightly, his hand shifting across the table until it rested closer to mine, not touching, not yet, just there, close enough that I could feel the warmth of it without contact, and my breath hitched unexpectedly, because the space between us suddenly felt charged, like it was holding something more than just distance, something that had been waiting to close, and I hesitated for a fraction of a second, my mind screaming that this was too much, too fast, too unknown. But my body did not listen. My hand moved on its own, inching forward until the gap between us disappeared, until my fingers brushed against his. And the moment contact happened, everything else fell away, not violently, not abruptly, but completely, like the world had been muted, like every sound and every thought had been pulled back to make room for something else, something stronger, something clearer. And then it hit me, not as a full memory, not as a complete scene, but as a flood of feeling so intense it stole the breath from my lungs. Warmth, familiarity, something steady and grounding wrapping around me like it had always been there, like it had never left, and beneath it all, one undeniable truth rising to the surface, quiet but absolute. I had felt this before, I had chosen this before, and the realization landed with a force that made everything else fade. I had not just known him once, I had belonged with him, and somewhere deep inside me, that part had never forgotten. The moment our fingers touched did not fade when it should have. It did not dissolve back into normalcy like a passing thought. It stayed, expanding, unfolding into something larger than I could contain, and I felt it ripple through me in waves, not memories exactly, not yet, but impressions so vivid they blurred the line between feeling and knowing, like standing in a room I had lived in before but could not quite see clearly, and my breath caught as the sensation deepened, pulling me somewhere just beneath the surface of consciousness, where everything felt sharper and softer at the same time. And I heard it then, not with my ears but somewhere inside me, my name, spoken in a voice that was unmistakably his, but different, warmer, closer, like it had been said without distance, without hesitation, like it had belonged to a moment where there was no question between us, and my grip tightened instinctively, not pulling away, not anymore, because something in me understood that letting go would mean losing whatever this was before I could grasp it, and the world around us blurred further, the edges softening until the cafe felt distant, unreal, like a backdrop I could step out of at any second. And in its place came flashes, brief and fragmented but undeniable, sunlight spilling across a different table, laughter that felt like it came from my own chest but carried a lighter, freer weight, the sense of sitting across from him not as a stranger, but as something closer, something chosen, and my heart raced as the pieces tried to come together. Not fully, not yet, but enough to make the truth impossible to ignore. This was not new. This connection, this pull, this quiet certainty that sitting here with him felt right in a way nothing else did. And I inhaled sharply as the sensation peaked, as the fragments pressed closer together, threatening to form something whole, something complete, and with it came something else, something heavier, a shadow beneath the warmth, a feeling of loss that did not belong to the present, a quiet ache that lingered just beyond reach, like the echo of something that had ended, something that had been left unfinished, and I felt it then, the edge of a memory just beginning to take shape, not clear, not detailed, but enough to make my chest tighten, enough to make my breath falter, because whatever this was, whatever we had been, it had not ended cleanly. It had not simply faded. It had been cut short, left unresolved, and that realization hit harder than anything else, because it meant this was not just about remembering something beautiful. It was about facing something I had not been able to finish, and I pulled in a shaky breath, my gaze locking onto his as the world slowly began to settle back into place, the cafe returning in fragments, the sounds filtering in one by one. But everything felt different now, shifted, like I had crossed an invisible line and could not step back, and Lucas was still there, still watching me with that same steady intensity. But now there was something else in his eyes, something that looked like recognition of the shift that had just happened, like he could see it in me, the change, the crack in the wall I had built around whatever this was. And I swallowed hard, my voice quieter when I finally spoke, less certain, less defensive, because there was no point pretending anymore, not after that. That was not just a dream, I said, and it was not a question, not really, just a statement of something I could no longer deny. And Lucas's gaze softened slightly, not triumphant, not relieved, just steady, like he had been waiting for me to reach this point on my own, and he nodded once, slow and deliberate. "No," he said quietly, and the simplicity of it made everything else feel heavier, more real, more permanent. It never was, and the words settled into me with a weight I could not shake. Because if that was true, then everything I had been trying to forget, everything I had dismissed as imagination, as coincidence, as something fleeting and unreal, was something else entirely, something that had always been real whether I remembered it or not. And I felt it then, not just the pull toward him, but the pull toward whatever came next, whatever truth was waiting just beyond the edge of what I could see. And for the first time since this started, I did not want to run from it. I wanted to know. The shift did not fade after he said it. It settled deeper, like something inside me had finally stopped resisting and started listening. And I sat there with my hand still lightly touching his, aware of every second in a way that felt new and strangely familiar at the same time. Like I had lived this moment before, but never this clearly, never this far. And I realized my breathing had changed, slower now, steadier, as if my body had accepted something my mind was still trying to catch up to. And I looked at him differently this time, not searching for proof that he was wrong, but searching for the truth in what he had been saying all along. And that alone felt like a turning point, like a line I had crossed without fully noticing. "Then tell me what happened," I said, the words quiet but firm. Because if this was real, if all of this was something I had lived and chosen and then somehow left behind, I needed to understand it. I needed to know what could possibly make me walk away from something that felt like this. And Lucas did not answer right away, his gaze softening just slightly, like he was weighing how much to give me, how much I could handle now that I had opened the door instead of pushing it closed. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried something deeper than before, something steady but threaded with something that felt almost like memory itself. "You did not leave because you stopped caring," he said, and the words landed carefully, deliberately, like he was placing them where they needed to go. And something in my chest tightened immediately. Because that possibility had not even crossed my mind. Because whatever this was, whatever we had been, it did not feel like something that could simply fade. "Then why?" I asked, leaning forward slightly without realizing it, drawn in by the weight of what he was about to say. And Lucas held my gaze, steady and unwavering, like he needed me to hear this clearly. "Because you thought staying would break me," he replied. And the sentence hit differently than anything else. Not sharp, not sudden, but deep, like it reached into a part of me that had been quiet until now and woke it up all at once. And I felt it then, not as a full memory, but as a surge of emotion that did not belong to the present, something heavy and desperate and protective all at once, like standing at the edge of a decision that felt impossible either way. And I blinked, my breath catching as the feeling lingered, refusing to disappear. And I realized with a quiet shock that it felt like me, not the version of me sitting here now, but another version, one that had lived something I could not yet see. "That does not make sense," I said again, but this time it was softer, more uncertain, because the feeling behind his words was harder to deny than the logic. And Lucas gave a small, almost knowing nod, like he expected that reaction, like it was part of the process. "You always say that right before it starts to come back," he said. And there was no pressure in his voice, no urgency, just certainty, like he trusted something I was still learning to trust myself. And I swallowed, my mind racing as the pieces began to shift, not fully connecting yet, but moving, aligning in ways that felt inevitable. And I looked down at our hands again, at the way they rested together so naturally now, like the hesitation from before had dissolved without me noticing. And I realized something that made my chest tighten in a completely different way. This did not feel like the beginning of something. It felt like the continuation of something I had interrupted, something that had been waiting for me to return, and I lifted my gaze back to him slowly, the question forming before I could stop it. What happens if I remember everything? And the moment the words left my mouth, something shifted again, subtle but unmistakable, like the air itself had changed, like I had asked the one question that mattered more than all the others, and Lucas did not look away, did not hesitate, his answer coming steady and clear. "Then you will understand why you chose to leave," he said, and his voice softened just slightly at the end, not weaker, just more careful, Like there was something in that understanding that carried weight, something that could not be undone once it was known, and I felt it then. That pull again, stronger now, not just toward him but toward the truth itself, toward whatever memory was waiting just beyond reach. And for the first time since all of this began, I realized I was not just afraid of remembering. I was afraid of agreeing with the version of me who had already made the choice to walk away. The question did not disappear after he answered it. It stayed, circling back again and again like it was trying to root itself deeper inside me. And I felt the weight of it pressing against everything I thought I knew about myself. Because understanding is not something you can undo once it happens. It changes the shape of everything that comes after, and I sat there with that realization settling in. My fingers still resting against his like I had forgotten how to pull away, like the idea of distance no longer made sense in the same way it had before, and I looked at him, really looked this time, not as a stranger, not as someone I was trying to figure out, but as someone who had been part of something I had lived, someone who had stayed while I left, and the thought hit differently now, heavier, sharper, because it was no longer abstract. It was not just a possibility. It was a truth waiting for me to accept it. And I exhaled slowly, my chest rising and falling with a rhythm that felt too loud in the quiet space between us. You said I thought it would protect you. I began, my voice steadier than I felt, because I needed to follow this. Needed to understand the logic of a decision I could not remember making. Protect you from what? And Lucas did not look away, did not hesitate. But something in his expression softened again, like this part mattered more than the others. Like this was where the truth became harder to carry, and he shifted slightly, not pulling back, just grounding himself, like he was preparing to give me something that could not be taken lightly. From the version of me who would have asked you to stay, he said quietly, and the answer was not what I expected. It was not danger, not something external, not something I could easily define. And that made it more confusing, more unsettling, because it meant the choice had not been about survival in the way I understood it. It had been about something else, something deeper, and I frowned slightly, trying to piece it together, trying to understand why that would matter enough to make me walk away. And Lucas held my gaze, steady and patient, like he could see the exact moment the question started to form in my mind. I would not have let you go, he continued, and the words landed differently this time. Not possessive, not controlling, but certain, like gravity, like something inevitable. And something inside me reacted immediately, not with fear, not with resistance, but with recognition, a quiet, undeniable pull that felt like agreement rather than conflict. And that was what unsettled me the most, because it meant I understood that version of him. I understood why he would not have let go, and more than that, I understood why I might not have wanted him to, and I swallowed hard, my breath catching as the realization edged closer, sharper now, clearer. So I left before that could happen, I said slowly, the words piecing themselves together as I spoke them. And Lucas nodded once, confirming it without hesitation, and something in my chest tightened again, not with confusion this time, but with something heavier, something that felt like regret pressing through the surface of memory I could not fully access yet. You thought it would be easier if you were the one to choose it, he added, and the sentence settled into place like the final piece of something I had been circling around. And I felt it then, the weight of that decision, not as a memory, not yet, but as an emotion so strong it almost felt like it belonged to the present, a quiet, steady ache that sat just beneath my ribs, like something lost that had never fully faded. And I looked down at our hands again, at the way they rested together now without hesitation, without distance, and I realized with a quiet, unsettling clarity that this version of me, the one sitting here now, would not have made that choice, would not have walked away from this without a fight, and that meant something had changed, something fundamental, something that had shaped who I was before I even knew it. And I lifted my gaze back to him slowly, the question forming without permission, because I needed to know, because I could feel it getting closer. And if I remember, I said, my voice softer now, more certain in its uncertainty, will I make the same choice again? And the moment the words left my mouth, the air between us shifted again, subtle but undeniable, like I had stepped into the center of something that had been building all along. And Lucas did not answer immediately, his gaze holding mine with a steadiness that felt different now, not just patient, not just certain, but something else, something that carried the weight of every version of this moment he had lived before. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "That is the one thing I cannot predict," he said. And the answer settled deeper than anything else, because it meant this was different. This time, this moment, this choice, and I felt it then, not just fear, not just uncertainty, but something else rising alongside it, something stronger, something that felt like possibility. And for the first time since all of this began, I realized the outcome was not already decided, not for me, not anymore. The possibility lingered in the air long after he said it, quiet but undeniable, like something fragile that had never existed before this exact moment, and I felt it settle inside me with a weight that was different from everything else. Not fear, not confusion, but something sharper, something that felt like responsibility, because if the outcome was not fixed, if this time was not just another repetition of something I had already done, then whatever happened next would be mine to choose. And that realization made everything feel heavier and lighter at the same time, like I was standing on the edge of something that could either hold me or break beneath me, depending on how I stepped forward. And I inhaled slowly, the air filling my lungs in a way that felt grounding, anchoring me to the present even as everything else pulled me toward the past. And I looked at him again, not searching, not questioning, just seeing him for what he was in this moment. Someone who had waited, someone who had stayed, someone who had carried something I had chosen to leave behind. And the thought settled deep, quiet but firm, because it was no longer abstract. It was not just a possibility. It was something real that had weight and consequence. And I realized then that whatever version of me had made that choice before, whatever version had walked away, I was not that person anymore. Not entirely. Not if I could feel this now. Not if I could sit here and choose to stay instead of run. And the idea took root slowly, cautiously, like something testing whether it was safe to exist, and I let it. I did not push it away this time. I did not try to silence it, because for the first time since all of this began, the fear did not feel like the only thing guiding me. There was something else beneath it, something steadier, something that felt like it had been there all along, waiting for me to notice it again. And I shifted slightly in my seat, not pulling away from him, not creating distance, but grounding myself in the space we shared, in the reality of this moment, and I felt the connection between us more clearly now, not overwhelming, not consuming, just present, like a quiet line drawn between 2 points that had always been connected whether I saw it or not. And I exhaled slowly, my voice quieter when I spoke, not because I was unsure, but because the moment itself felt too significant to break with anything louder. "Then I do not need to know everything right now," I said, the words forming more easily than I expected, like they belonged to me in a way the others had not. And Lucas's gaze shifted slightly at that, something in his expression softening, like he recognized the change, like he had been waiting for it even if he did not know when it would come. And I held his gaze, steady now, no longer trying to pull away from it, no longer trying to deny what was right in front of me. "I just need to know what I want to do next," I continued, and the sentence felt like a step forward, like crossing a line that had been holding me back without me realizing it. And I felt it then, the weight of that choice settling into place, not as something overwhelming, but as something clear, something that belonged to me alone. And I let my fingers tighten slightly against his, not enough to hold, just enough to acknowledge that the connection was there, that I was aware of it, that I was not going to pretend it did not exist anymore. And I realized with a quiet clarity that surprised me, I did not need every memory to understand this moment. I did not need every answer to make a decision, because whatever had happened before, whatever choices had been made, this was something new, something that existed outside of all of that. And I lifted my gaze slightly, meeting his eyes with something steadier than before, something that felt like resolve instead of hesitation. And for the first time, the question was not what had happened or what I had lost. It was what I was willing to choose now. And I felt the answer forming before I even spoke it. Not fully, not completely, but enough to know that whatever came next, it would not be the same as before, because this time, I was not running from the truth. I was stepping toward it. The decision did not arrive all at once. It unfolded quietly, like something that had been forming beneath the surface finally breaking through, and I felt it settle into place with a kind of calm that surprised me. Not the absence of fear, not the certainty of knowing everything that would come next, but something steadier, something that felt like choosing to move forward despite not having all the answers. And I looked at him with that clarity still lingering, still grounding me, and for the first time since this began, I did not feel like I was trying to catch up to something. I felt like I was standing in the present, fully aware of the moment I was in, fully aware of the choice I was about to make, and I exhaled slowly, letting the tension in my chest ease just enough to let the words form without hesitation. "Then I am not going anywhere," I said, and the sentence felt simple. But the weight behind it was anything but, because it was not just about staying in this cafe, not just about sitting across from him for a few more minutes. It was about something larger, something that reached beyond this moment into whatever came next, and I felt it the second I said it. The shift, subtle but undeniable, like something had aligned, like a path that had been uncertain suddenly became clear enough to step onto. And Lucas did not react the way I expected. There was no surprise. No relief that broke through the calm he had carried this entire time. Just a quiet stillness. Like he was absorbing the words, letting them settle in the space between us the same way I had. And then something softened in his expression, something that had not been there before, not fully. Like this was the first time he allowed himself to believe that this moment might lead somewhere different, and I felt that shift as clearly as my own. Because whatever this was, whatever connected us, it was not one-sided. It moved between us, changed with us, responded to choices neither of us could predict until they were made. And I let my hand rest more firmly against his, not gripping, not holding, just present, just there, and the contact felt different now, not like a trigger, not like something pulling me into the past, but something grounding me in the present, something that belonged to this version of us, not just the one that had come before. And I realized then that this was the difference. This was what made this time unlike the others, not the memories, not the knowledge, but the choice, the willingness to stay without needing to understand everything first. And I met his gaze again, steady, certain in a way I had not been before, because whatever had happened, whatever I had done, whatever I had chosen to leave behind, it did not have to define what came next, not unless I let it. And I felt it then, the quiet certainty settling deeper, stronger, not loud or overwhelming, just present, like something that had always been there waiting for me to recognize it again. And for a moment neither of us spoke, the silence stretching but no longer uncomfortable, no longer filled with uncertainty, just calm, like we had stepped into something that did not need to be rushed. And I realized with a quiet clarity that surprised me, this was not the end of something, not the resolution of a story I had forgotten. It was the beginning of something I was choosing now, something that did not need to follow the same path as before. And as the world around us slowly came back into focus, the sounds of the cafe settling into place, the light shifting slightly as the afternoon moved forward, I felt something else rise beneath it all, not fear, not confusion, but anticipation, quiet and steady, because whatever memories waited, whatever truth was still out of reach, I was no longer running from it. I was ready to face it, and for the first time, that felt like enough.